Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
He totaled my dream car, then leaned back with that smug, punchable smirk and said, "It's not like you'll make me pay. Mom and Dad won't let you." That one sentence stuck in my chest like a knife that hadn't been twisted yet. Not because it was mean, though it was, and not even because it was true, because it probably was, but because it confirmed everything I'd tried to pretend wasn't real for the last 20 years. I didn't say a word back. I just smiled, nodded, and went quiet. What he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that the second he said those words, the rules changed. I'll back up for a second. My name's Julia. I'm 42 years old, a middle school guidance counselor, a recent divorcee, and, until last month, the proud owner of a brand new cobalt blue hybrid SUV that I bought with my own damn money. No co-signer, no help. Just me, 3 years of savings, and a credit score I fought tooth and nail to protect after my ex drained half our joint accounts in a midlife crisis meltdown that ended with him moving to Arizona with a yoga instructor named Sky. So yeah, I bought that car like it was a trophy. It wasn't just transportation, it was freedom. It was the first thing in years that felt mine. Now, let me tell you about Kevin. Kevin is 31, lives at home, works freelance, which is code for he delivers weed for a guy named Richie on the weekends and sells sneakers online the rest of the time. He's never paid rent. Never had to. Our parents, Linda and Mark, are what you'd call enablers in denial. To them, Kevin is just finding himself. They say things like, he's a late bloomer, or he's got a good heart. I used to think they were just being generous. Now I realize they were protecting their favorite. Because that's what Kevin is, the golden boy. The screw-up who never gets blamed. The one who just made a mistake no matter how big that mistake is. When he flunked out of college, Mom said he wasn't being challenged enough. When he got fired from Best Buy for stealing headphones, Dad blamed the manager for not giving him proper training. And when I told them he used my Netflix login to buy over $300 worth of movies and games, they said, "You can afford it. Don't be petty." So when I came home from work one Thursday night and parked my new car outside their house because I'd driven over to drop off some groceries for them as usual, I already knew not to leave the keys in plain sight. I hung them on my keyring, tucked my purse under the coat rack, and went to bed in the guest room. I wasn't planning to stay the night, but Mom guilted me into it. "It's late," she said. "Kevin's out with friends anyway, so it'll be quiet." At 6:45 the next morning, I walked outside to find an empty driveway and shattered glass at the curb. For a second, I thought I'd gone crazy, that maybe I'd parked it somewhere else, that maybe someone stole it. Then I saw the tiny piece of blue metal on the ground, and my stomach dropped. I called Kevin's phone, heart pounding, but it went straight to voicemail. I ran inside, still in my robe, and found Mom at the kitchen table sipping coffee like it was any other morning. "Have you seen my car?" I asked. She looked up with that blank suburban mom face and said, "Oh, Kevin said he was borrowing it. Said you were cool with it." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there and stared at her like she'd slapped me. "I didn't say he could take it." "Well," she said, flipping a page in her magazine, "he said you wouldn't mind." I'll never forget that moment. The way she dismissed me, like my rules, my boundaries, didn't matter. Kevin strolled in 15 minutes later, reeking of booze and weed, wearing a torn hoodie and a stupid grin. "She drives great," he said, tossing the keys on the counter like a bag of chips. "Until you take a left turn too fast near the Lakeview ramp." I didn't even need to ask. I could see it on his face. My car wasn't just gone. It was wrecked. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice quiet, dangerously calm. Kevin smirked and shrugged. "Relax, it's insured. It's not like you'll make me pay. Mom and Dad won't let you." Then he laughed. That kind of shallow, punch-drunk chuckle that says, "I know you can't touch me." And that's when something inside me snapped, not with rage, not with sadness, but with clarity. That laugh told me more than any fight ever could. It told me he felt untouchable. It told me he'd do it again and again and again, and they'd keep covering for him. It told me I was the only one who'd ever be held accountable, no matter who screwed up. So I nodded. I picked up my phone, and I started a quiet little plan. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to fight. I was just going to wait and let the system he thought he was above come knocking on his door. Because here's the thing, no one tells you about being the responsible one in the family. It means you know exactly where all the lines are and exactly how to make someone trip over them. And Kevin, he was about to learn the hard way that laughing at the wrong person can cost you everything. It was sometime around 10 in the morning when I drove with my mother to the tow yard to see what was left of my car. And I remember every single detail of that moment, not because I wanted to, but because my brain seemed determined to etch the entire experience into my memory, like some cruel monument to a betrayal I should have seen coming years ago. The sky was a dull gray, that kind of flat, heavy overcast that somehow makes everything feel colder, even in June. And the tow yard smelled like old oil, burnt rubber, and the sour breath of half a dozen lies. The attendant barely looked up when we approached the chain-link fence, just grunted something about signing a release, and pointed us toward the lot and back. And that's when I saw it, my cobalt blue hybrid, or at least what was left of it. The entire front end was mangled beyond recognition, like someone had folded the hood in half with their bare hands. The driver's side was scraped down to the metal, deep gouges along the door and mirror, and one of the front tires was bent at an angle that made me physically wince. The windshield had a long crack like a scar running diagonally across it. And for a moment I just stood there, staring at what used to be a symbol of independence, a tangible piece of the life I had started rebuilding for myself, after years of compromise and silence. And beside me, my mother was already sighing, already minimizing. "Well, at least he's okay," she said, as if the cost, the stress, the violation, all of it, was just collateral damage for the sake of Kevin's precious well-being. She didn't ask how I felt, didn't apologize for letting him take the car, didn't even seem to notice the way my hands were trembling slightly as I tried to take photos for the insurance company. I didn't say much. I just kept my mouth shut and documented everything. The damage from every angle, the VIN plate, the tire tread, even the receipt the tow company gave me with the timestamp, because something in me knew that if I didn't start thinking like a lawyer, nobody else was going to look out for me. Later that day, when I returned to their house, Kevin was lying on the couch in the basement with a video game controller in one hand and a half-eaten sandwich in the other, completely unbothered, as if he hadn't just destroyed the most expensive thing I owned. He didn't flinch when I walked in, didn't apologize, didn't even stand up. He just looked over his shoulder, grinned that same obnoxious grin, and said, "You should have seen the other guy," then laughed like he'd just made the joke of the year. It wasn't even funny. It wasn't supposed to be. But he laughed anyway, and I realized then that the laugh wasn't about humor. It was about power. It was about control. It was about knowing, with absolute certainty, that no matter what he did, there would be no consequences. And when I stood there, arms folded, staring down at him like some teacher waiting for a student to admit he cheated, he glanced back and added, "Seriously though, it's not a big deal. The insurance will cover it, right? You're not actually going to make me pay for it, are you? Come on, you know Mom and Dad won't let you." That's when I knew the full weight of it. That he wasn't just banking on me forgiving him. He was counting on my parents forcing me to. He was so confident in their blind loyalty that he didn't even consider that I might have options. That I might be angry enough, tired enough, to finally stop playing the part of the good sister. And for a moment, I almost did what I'd always done, shrugged, said it was fine, told myself it wasn't worth the fight, but instead, I smiled. It was a small smile, tight-lipped, more of a reflex than a response. But Kevin noticed. He noticed because it wasn't the usual gink and eye roll he was used to. It was quiet, it was calm, and it made him pause for just a second. "You're not mad, are you?" He asked not because he cared, but because he wanted confirmation that the usual rules still applied. No, I said gently. I'm not mad. And that was the truth. I wasn't mad. I was done. Done with the constant rewriting of history every time he messed up. Done with being the one who always took the high road while he used the low road like a damn highway. Done with the family dynamics where my forgiveness was expected and his accountability was optional. So I filed the insurance claim that night from my laptop, typed it out in a polite, formal tone, listed every detail, including the fact that the vehicle had been taken without my knowledge or consent. I uploaded the police report. Yes, I'd called the non-emergency line to at least have it on file, and submitted the photos. I didn't call Kevin. I didn't tell him. I didn't even hint at it when we passed each other in the hallway. I just waited. 2 days later, I got a call from the insurance adjuster, a woman named Teresa, whose tone was professional but curious. Just to confirm, she said, your brother took the vehicle without your permission? That's correct, I said. There was a pause. I could hear her clicking something on her keyboard. And you have a police incident report confirming the unauthorized use? Yes. Another pause. That changes things a bit. I'm going to escalate this to our legal team. You may want to prepare for some follow-up questions. I thanked her and hung up, my heart pounding, not from nerves, but from anticipation, because for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't backing down. And if Kevin thought he could laugh his way out of this, well, he was about to find out just how serious I could be when someone took something that mattered to me. Not just the car, but the last bit of respect I had for him. There's something strangely liberating about deciding, once and for all, that you're done playing by the rules of someone else's game, especially when those rules have always been built to protect the wrong person. And as I sat there at my small kitchen table that Sunday morning, coffee growing cold beside my laptop, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen that had just confirmed my insurance claim had officially been flagged for legal review, I felt the slow creeping onset of a calm that wasn't exactly peace, but something eerily close to satisfaction. It wasn't revenge, not yet. And it wasn't anger either, at least not the hot, explosive kind that makes you scream and break dishes. No, what I felt was colder than that. Quieter, like the still surface of a frozen lake that you know is hiding something dangerous just beneath. The next few days unfolded with the kind of precision that would have scared me if I hadn't already spent years learning how to anticipate the excuses, the gaslighting, the shifting of blame that always came when Kevin did something wrong and the rest of us were expected to absorb the fallout like emotional sandbags. At first, nothing happened. I went to work, I came home, and I stayed deliberately quiet whenever my parents called or texted, which of course they did, constantly, though never about the car. It was almost impressive how determined they were to pretend the wreck hadn't happened, how they spoke to me with cheerful indifference, like we were still operating in that old script where Julia is the calm, reliable one, and Kevin is the well-meaning screw-up who just needs a little more time. But I wasn't playing along anymore. What they didn't know, what Kevin most certainly didn't know, was that the insurance company, upon receiving confirmation that the vehicle had been taken without permission, had referred the case to their subrogation department, which is just a fancy word for the people who go after someone when we don't want to eat the cost. In simpler terms, they weren't going to pay for the damages and move on. They were going to bill him, personally, for the full amount. And they had every right to do so because, legally speaking, Kevin had committed unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, which, in some states, toes the line of grand theft auto, especially when there's proof the car was taken without consent and resulted in damage. I hadn't filed criminal charges, not yet, but I'd left enough of a paper trail that if they needed to pursue civil action, they could do it without blinking. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Isn't that a bit extreme for a sibling dispute? And maybe it is. Maybe in a family that functioned like a family is supposed to. This kind of thing would have ended with a sincere apology, a payment plan, and a weekend of awkward dinners. But that's not my family. My family operates on a different currency: guilt, denial, and selective memory. And Kevin had spent his entire life overdrawing from the emotional bank account the rest of us were forced to replenish. So no, I didn't feel bad when I met with the notary that week to sign a statement confirming the unauthorized use. I didn't feel bad when I printed the email from the adjuster confirming Kevin would be contacted directly about restitution. And I definitely didn't feel bad when I sat across from him at a family dinner that Friday, sipping wine and smiling like the Cheshire Cat, while he told some long-winded story about how unfairly the tow truck driver had treated him. It was almost comical, really, how smug he was, how completely unaware that the quiet ticking beneath the table wasn't his charm diffusing the situation, but the metaphorical timer on a very real, very official debt bomb that was about to go off in his face. At that dinner, he made another joke. Something about how lucky I was that he field tested the car for me before I got too attached. And my mother laughed, not because it was funny, but because she's trained herself to find his recklessness endearing. I didn't respond. I just passed him the bread basket and asked him if he'd updated his mailing address recently, because, these companies are terrible about sending stuff to the right place. He waved me off with that same careless grin, the one he wears like a shield, and I thought to myself, you poor, stupid bastard. You don't even realize you've already lost. Later that night, while they all stayed up watching some reality show in the living room, I quietly excused myself and walked to my car, the rental, a dull beige compact thing that made me feel like I was driving an apology, and sat inside with the engine running, letting the air conditioner blow away the suffocating heat of pretending everything was fine. I pulled out my phone, checked my email again, and saw the update I'd been waiting for. Formal notice of liability has been mailed to the individual identified as the unauthorized driver. Just like that. Simple, cold, effective. And I know how this probably sounds, like I'm vengeful or vindictive or obsessed with control, but the truth is, I didn't want to destroy Kevin. I just wanted him to learn something, to feel for once the weight of a consequence that wasn't softened by parental interference or wiped clean by someone else's generosity. I wanted him to sit in that discomfort, to understand that actions have ripple effects, and that the people you treat like doormats eventually figure out how to lock their doors. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because I had won, but because, for the first time in my life, I had stopped asking for permission to protect what mattered to me. And as for Kevin, well, his education was just beginning. It started slowly, the way most real consequences do, like the first few drops of rain before a storm that everyone keeps insisting will blow over, even as the sky darkens and the wind starts to whisper warnings through the trees. At first, Kevin didn't even notice. He kept moving through his days with the same careless rhythm he always had, lounging on the basement couch, scrolling through his phone while his laptop played some video game live stream on mute, eating meals he didn't cook, drinking from mugs he never washed, and occasionally gracing the upstairs with his presence, just long enough to raid the fridge or make some sarcastic comment about whatever crisis he imagined I was inventing next. The problem was he hadn't invented the storm this time. I had, and unlike every other crisis he'd sidestepped before, this one was bureaucratic, impersonal, and utterly indifferent to charm, excuses, or parental pleading. The first sign came about a week after the dinner. Kevin was standing in the kitchen, microwaving a leftover burger, wrapped in a paper towel, when my father walked in with a puzzled look and handed him a large envelope that had arrived in the day's mail. It was thick, the kind of envelope you can't pretend is junk, and it had bold black lettering on the front that said, "Time-sensitive legal notice." I happened to be visiting again, dropping off a set of financial papers my parents needed help sorting, and I watched the whole thing unfold from the edge of the living room, pretending to be absorbed in a spreadsheet on my tablet, while I kept one ear tuned to the unfolding chaos. Kevin opened the envelope with the casual indifference of someone who's received parking tickets before, but as he read the contents, his posture shifted, slightly at first, just a stiffening of the shoulders, a narrowing of the eyes, and then slowly, like someone realizing they'd just walked onto a frozen lake and heard the first crack, he started reading it again, this time out loud. The letter explained in precise legal language that he had been identified as the at-fault party in an auto incident involving property damage and unauthorized use of a vehicle, that the insurer was formally seeking repayment of the claim amount, and that failure to respond or arrange payment could result in further legal action, including but not limited to wage garnishment, credit impact, and potential court proceedings. The total amount? $22,463. It was the silence that followed that struck me most. Not the yelling, not the accusations, but the heavy, stunned silence of someone who had just realized, for the first time, that his mess wasn't going to clean itself up. My father, to his credit, didn't defend him right away. He just looked between the letter and Kevin and asked, "What the hell did you do?" Kevin stammered, tried to explain it away, said it was a misunderstanding, claimed the car wasn't really taken without permission, that Julia knew, or would have been fine with it, or wasn't being clear, or whatever other half-formed excuse he could grab from the burning wreckage of his credibility. I didn't say a word. I just kept reading my spreadsheet, sipping my coffee, and waiting. Because this part, the confusion, the panic, the beginning of the unraveling, this was what I'd anticipated all along, and it was playing out exactly as I'd hoped. Within 2 days, the phone calls started. Kevin left 2 voicemails, both rambling and contradictory. The first one defensive and angry. "This is messed up, Julia. You knew I was going to use the car. You said nothing. This is your fault, too." And the second one pleading and pitiful. "Come on, Jules. Just talk to them. Tell them it was a mistake. You know I don't have that kind of money." I didn't respond. I saved both messages, uploaded them to a private folder, and forwarded the relevant audio to my contact at the insurance company, just in case they needed further proof of his awareness and lack of remorse. It was surreal in a way to watch someone who had always lived like rules were optional suddenly try to navigate a world that didn't care about his charm or his sad eyes or the fact that Mom still referred to him as my baby. He called the insurer and tried to argue, but they were unmoved. He asked for extensions. They gave him deadlines. He tried to set up a payment plan, but when they pulled his credit report and saw the damage, multiple delinquent accounts, high revolving balances, and a bankruptcy filed 5 years ago that he still blamed on an ex-girlfriend, they informed him that any arrangement would require a significant upfront payment. When he couldn't produce that, they moved forward with intent to file a civil suit. My parents, of course, got involved. My mother called me in tears one evening, her voice trembling as she begged me to just fix this, told me Kevin was falling apart, said he hadn't been eating, hadn't been sleeping, that he was spiraling, and that if I cared about family at all, I would make a few calls and tell the insurance company I'd changed my mind. I listened calmly, quietly, and then asked her a single question. Would you have protected me the same way if the roles were reversed? The silence on the other end of the line was louder than any accusation. The next day, Kevin showed up at my apartment unannounced. I knew he might. I'd seen the call logs, the desperate texts, the veiled threats wrapped in guilt, and I'd expected some kind of in-person showdown. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes, holding a crumpled piece of paper in one hand, I didn't feel anger or triumph or even satisfaction. I just felt tired, like someone watching a wave hit the shore for the 100th time, knowing it was inevitable. "I want to make it right," he said, handing me the paper. It was a handwritten note, barely legible, promising to pay back the full amount as soon as possible, acknowledging full responsibility, and begging for a second chance. "I'll sign whatever you need," he added. "Just make it go away." But it was already too late. I took the paper, folded it carefully, and placed it in my drawer. Then I reached into a folder on the counter and pulled out the final copy of the insurance settlement paperwork, the one that listed his name, the amount, and the date of impending court action. "This isn't about what you're willing to sign, Kevin," I said, my voice steady. "It's about what's already in motion." And the look on his face, that slow realization, that dawning horror as he connected the dots, that was the moment I'll never forget. Not because it felt good, but because for the first time in his life, he was finally forced to see the wreckage he left behind. Not just in steel and glass, but in people, in trust, in family, and this time, There was no one left to protect him from the cost. There are certain moments in life when time doesn't just slow down. It stretches, like warm taffy being pulled into impossible lengths, each second expanding until it holds more weight than the minutes that came before. And the look on Kevin's face when he finally realized that the damage he had caused wasn't going to be undone by charm, excuses, or another round of mom and dad approved revisionist history was one of those moments, the kind you don't plan to savor, but end up remembering with perfect, brutal clarity, not because it felt like a victory, but because it finally felt like the scales had tilted, just slightly, towards something that resembled justice. He stood there in my living room, the same space he'd once ridiculed for being too neat, too cold, too adult, holding that folded copy of the insurance settlement paperwork in one shaking hand, eyes scanning the lines again and again, as if some clause might suddenly appear to absolve him of everything, some hidden exception or loophole that would let him return to the bubble of consequence-free adolescence he had been allowed to inhabit for far too long. But the paper didn't change. It didn't blink or soften or rewrite itself. It just sat there in black and white, detailing the amount he owed, the legal obligation he now carried, and the clear, irrefutable evidence that for once, he was going to have to answer to something bigger than me, bigger than our parents, bigger than any excuse he could dream up. "You actually did it," he said, though his voice was more disbelief than accusation, as if he still couldn't quite grasp that I had followed through, that I hadn't folded under pressure like every other time, that I had let the system, not my emotions, do the talking. I didn't reply right away. I just sat down across from him, crossing one leg over the other, watching him with the calm, measured detachment of someone who's already fought the real battle, the internal one, and won. For a moment, he looked so lost that part of me almost wavered, not because I wanted to take it all back, but because I could see, with a sudden painful clarity, the boy he used to be, the kid who used to trail behind me at the park, who cried when I cut my hand on the swing set, who used to slip candy into my backpack before field trips because he knew I hated the school lunches. But those memories didn't outweigh the years of selfishness, the manipulation, the constant erosion of trust that had turned my relationship with him into a one-way street littered with broken promises and gas station apologies. He wasn't that boy anymore. He hadn't been for a long time. "I didn't think you'd go through with it," he mumbled, still standing, still stunned. "I thought you were just, I don't know, bluffing." "That's the thing about you, Kevin," I said, leaning forward just enough to close the distance without raising my voice. "You've spent your whole life betting on the fact that no one will ever really hold you accountable. You make messes, and someone else always cleans them up. You cross lines, and people just redraw them to keep you comfortable, but you crossed one too many this time." He sat down heavily, as if the weight of what I was saying was just now settling into his bones. He didn't cry. Kevin never cried. But there was something in his expression that resembled grief. Not for the money, I suspected, but for the realization that the last bridge he assumed would always be there had finally burned behind him. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, an apology maybe, or an explanation, but no words came. And after a few seconds, he looked away, jaw tightening like a man preparing for a blow he knows he deserves. My parents called later that night. First my mother, in that shrill, breathless voice she uses when she's already chosen sides but wants to pretend she hasn't. She accused me of betrayal, of turning against my own blood, of letting outsiders handle something that should have been kept within the family. I let her talk. I let her rant about the legal fees Kevin now faced, about the embarrassment of it all, about how this would follow him forever. And when she finally paused to breathe, I asked her plainly, "And where was that concern when he was stealing from me? When he was laughing in my face? When you stood by and did nothing?" The silence that followed wasn't satisfying. It was sad, tired. The sound of someone realizing they had nothing left to say because the truth had finally, painfully, outrun the fiction. Dad didn't call. He sent a text, Short, cold, full of disappointment disguised as wisdom. This could have been handled differently. And maybe he was right. Maybe it could have, but the point wasn't whether I could have handled it differently. The point was I finally had the right to handle it my way. Over the next few weeks, the legal process began to churn in that slow, bureaucratic way that gives you just enough updates to keep the anxiety alive, but never fast enough to give you closure. Kevin hired a lawyer, or rather, my parents paid for one, and the negotiations began. The insurance company wasn't backing down. They had documentation, timestamps, voicemails, and a witness statement from the tow yard manager who confirmed Kevin admitted he'd taken the car without telling anyone. There was talk of settlement, of structured repayment, but the bottom line didn't change. Kevin was responsible, and no amount of denial could change that. He sent me a message at one point, weeks after that night in my apartment. It was long, meandering, full of guilt and half-formed apologies. And though he didn't outright ask me to intervene, the implication was clear. He wanted a lifeline. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. Not out of spite, but because I had nothing left to give. People assume that revenge is loud, dramatic, full of screaming and slamming doors and cinematic exits. But that's not what this was. This wasn't revenge. This was something quieter, sharper, a recalibration. I didn't want to ruin Kevin. I just wanted the playing field level for once. I wanted him to understand what it felt like to answer for his actions, instead of watching everyone else suffer the fallout. Now, whenever I see him, which isn't often anymore, there's a different look in his eyes. Not fear, not hatred, but recognition. Like he finally sees me clearly. Not the older sister who would always cave. Not the backup parent who'd clean up after his disasters. But someone with limits, boundaries. Someone who finally realized that love without accountability isn't love at all. It's permission. And as for whether I did the right thing, I still don't know. All I know is that day when I handed him the report, watched his face drain of certainty, watched the first crack of self-awareness cut across the mask he'd worn for years. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like release.